What's up guys? So this video that you're about to watch is a snippet from the Flex Success Research Review, and it's a discussion between Coach Dalton and I where we're talking about a paper that addresses everything you need to know about manipulating the different variables when it comes to programming for hypertrophy. Hi guys, and welcome to the next video research review. So we put this one to the group, and this is the paper that you voted for. So we're going to be discussing all about hypertrophy. How can we grow muscle by manipulating our different training variables? So we thought that we would start off the discussion with a little bit of a background knowledge to kind of set the scene. So Dalton, would you like to talk about the physiology of muscle and how it actually grows?
Cool. Awesome. Hey guys, stoked to be back. And this is such a cool topic. So I'm glad that we all covered in on this because it really applies to literally everyone. We want everyone to get maximally jacked. We want everyone to be, have some serrata showing out and obliques flaring through, quads flared. But obviously that's not the case. But if for all the people that you're actually trying to help, let's set the scene and build up that knowledge for you so you guys are able to pass it on and help the most amount of people. So what is hypertrophy? Well, essentially, before we even look at how the muscle gets bigger, we want to talk about what it is, right? So hypertrophy is the increase of an organ or a tissue. We have also hyperplasia, which is an increase in the fiber types of that organ or tissue. So hypertrophy is just the same amount of things, just getting bigger, whereas hyperplasia is increasing the amount of something that you've got. So with humans, we don't really have much good evidence for hyperplasia, but we do for hypertrophy. In animal models, avian and mouse models, we see some hyperplasia being done. And even now, those old studies are kind of being redone again to look at in case it was like counting errors, which is really funny to hear. But all right, so what is it? What happens? The key distinct differences is that we enlarge our muscles. But for those that aren't familiar, what happens is we grow or add sarcomeres in series or parallel. And I'll actually go into explain all what this is so that you can understand. So if you can imagine that you've got a little block of muscle, a little block of a muscle component called a sarcomere. Now that block either grows in series, one on top of the other, or in parallel like this. So for those that aren't familiar or need a quick refresher, we'll start from the very smallest component of muscle, right? And we'll work backwards so that everyone can kind of understand. So the smallest unit that we've got is a myofibril. This is like a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. And along this tiny strand, you get the bands actin and myosin. Most people have kind of heard about what that is and they have an idea, but essentially these guys like to grab onto each other and kind of pull tight. That's just what that contraction is happening going on. Now, actin and myosin are filaments that contract and release to move our muscles. There's a Z disc on the end, which kind of designates what is our sarcomere, yeah? So a fun fact for you guys, those filaments that we were just talking about with the actin and myosin, that's actually what gives our muscles the striated appearance. So when you're looking at someone, you're seeing that striated appearance, it's due to all those actin and myosin pinching on and grabbing onto each other. So if you wrap heaps of those myofibrils, those single long bands that are going along around, you add some mitochondria, you add some blood capillaries, motor neurons, some nuclei, you're actually starting to get what we call a muscle fiber. Now, a muscle cell and a muscle fiber are the exact same thing. People hear them and think that they may be kind of a different thing, but the muscle fiber is the cells that run along the whole of the muscle there. Now, if you wrap heaps of those muscle fibers together, you get a fascicle. Wrap heaps of those fascicles together, you actually start to get the skeletal muscle. So now that we go back to this small actin and myosin, they're always trying to pull themselves together. They love each other. They're always trying to get back together. And we call this sliding filament. Now, when this happens enough, you get the recruitment of the muscle fiber. Now from here, the recruitment of the muscle fiber, that muscle cell that we're talking about, there is a size principle that I want to introduce you guys to or make you understand. Once you recruit that fiber, as the fiber increases in fiber size, you get an increase in the size principle denotes that the amount of work being done is equal to the amount of the fiber size that needs to be equal to for the work to be done. So if you're doing, say, small fine movements, say finger movements, that the amount of work being done by those filaments are always going to be way smaller and much more precise. So you're not going to generate a massive amount of recruitment. Say, if you want to scratch yourself in the eye, you're not going to then punch yourself in the face by your body selecting too much of a fiber type for you to use your arm and hands and fingers to scratch your eye. Yeah, makes sense? So we've got muscle fibers. We know how the muscles are designated and around some of the components. We understand that there's a size principle, that the amount of work being done increases the fiber size recruitment so that we get that work achieved. Then we also have some muscle fiber types. Type 1, or slow twitch, red fibers, some of you may have heard. These are heavily oxygenated. Great for endurance exercise, but they really don't develop much hypertrophy. They do a little bit, but not much. Then we've got some of the white fiber types, type 2A and type 2X. 2A is kind of a mix between type 1 and type 2X. It does a little bit of hypertrophy. It's got a bit of mitochondria, red cells in it. It does a bit of everything, and it's all round. It's what most of our muscles are made up of. And then you get type 2X. This is completely fast twitch. This is the one that is going to hypertrophy the most. This is the one that we all want to make as big as possible. Now, why should we want to have more muscle? Well, basically, all of us want to get a little bit more jacked, but we all want someone else to be a little bit more jacked as well. It helps with either some of our enjoyment of life. It helps with your sport, your career. It may just help with the one outlet that you like to have. So for everyone else, it's kind of hard to sell them the idea of going to add some more muscle mass. But for you guys that are watching, it's really not. It's not that hard at all. You guys are already here paying attention, trying to figure out what you can do to make sure that you're growing more muscle. So some other examples for when it might be a good idea to build a little bit more muscle mass is during aging. Having more muscle mass actually increases independence later in life. Injury. If you recover from an injury and you repair not only the injured tissue, but you're able to increase muscle hypertrophy back to pre-injury states, you're going to have someone that returns far quicker and at a far better state than someone that doesn't. And atrophy happens a lot during injury. You also have a really cool preventative measure for people that are trying to just stave off obesity or lifestyle conditions. So those are the things that are why it's important for us to focus on building up some muscle mass.
Yeah, I think that's a really great introduction. And I like how you also mentioned how it's not just about looking a certain way, but there are also other benefits to growing muscle as well. So I think it's worth quickly discussing the mechanisms of muscle growth. And there are three main adaptations to training. First one being mechanical tension, and this is to do with the force of resistance. So this is kind of the primary mechanism for muscle growth. It's the conversion into chemical signals that are transduced to enhance anabolic signaling while suppressing catabolic signaling. So this is the primary mechanism of muscle growth, but you also have metabolic stress, which is the buildup of metabolites such as lactic acid, hydrogen ions, and inorganic phosphate, things like that. That can influence muscle remodeling. And then you also have muscle damage, which is the disruption of a muscle's ultrastructure, leads to a compensatory response and the breakdown of tissue. So when it comes to programming and resistance training variables, there are many things that we can manipulate. So what do we actually need to know in order to structure a training program? And this paper discussed kind of the ins and outs, and we're going to go into sort of the golden rules of how to apply the different training variables when writing your own program or programming for someone else. So the variables that you can manipulate would include training volume. So how much should you train? Load, how heavy should you lift? Training frequency, how often should you train certain body parts, and that's what we're going to be going into. Should you train to failure? When or why not? Exercise variation, so what exercises should you use? When to change these up? How often to change these up? How do you change these up? Contraction type, exercise order, repetition tempo, and interset recovery, so rest periods, how long should you be resting for. These are pretty much the main different variables that you can manipulate. I think we should probably start with volume, seeing as it's one of the most important ones. It's also probably the most highly debated training variable that there is. So would you like to discuss the findings on volume? How much should we be training per muscle group per week?
Cool. Awesome. So this is a really cool one, because we've had these two camps going on for the longest time now, and it's either mechanical tension is the overarching governing factor as to what drives hypertrophy, or it's training volume. And you see both arguments come from a direction which makes sense. But let's look at training volume, guys. So training volume, for those that aren't aware, is the amount of work that you do. All right. So it's not how heavy the bar is, but it's how much work you do for a set or for an exercise or across a day or even across the week. So we can calculate this in a couple of different ways. You can do this really broadly through things like sets times reps times load. Now, obviously, that doesn't take into consideration differences in the exercise type that you're using. Say like a single joint movement, like a bicep curl, is going to have just a massive amount of work being done on biceps. But when you do that sets times reps times load, you're only going to see a tiny amount of work being done on the biceps comparatively to, say, the quadriceps, and you do a leg press where you're doing 200, 300, 400 kilos for sets and reps, where you're going to get monster amount of work being done. It's obviously not the same, so it doesn't quite equate that well. So sets times reps times load is just a very arbitrary means of calculating it. You can also do it through total work done, which is force times displacement, which is super specific, highly governed, measured out. You're measuring newtons and how much distance you covered and stuff. So it's super specific, not really applicable for most people in the gym, because most people don't want to be measuring out the stuff that they're doing. So you've got those two very super specific or very broad general way of calculating volume. Now, the cool thing is it doesn't really matter what you use for those. Just using a way of tracking it seems to be a little bit better than tracking it very specifically or not. But recommendations, let's get down to it. It's really seen that at least greater than 10 sets per body, per part, per week has been shown to be beneficial. So 10 sets per body part per week. That's the one. So 10 sets or more. When you think about what that looks like, it's really not that crazy. If you do 3 sessions a week, that's 3 sets, nearly those 3 sessions for bench press. It's nothing crazy when you look at that for a program design or anything like that. So greater than 10 sets. Less than 5 sets, it's been shown pretty controversially that it's actually probably the slowest rate of gain for people, which kind of blows people's minds, because you get so many of the bros going in and doing chest day, doing leg day, doing back day, doing shoulder day. And so they're only getting 1 body part per set per week kind of exposure. And it's really not that high. So when you do 5 sessions, 4 sessions, 5 sessions a week, you're getting under that minimum recommendation for the fastest speed time that you could get. So the mechanism that's tied with this is, obviously, we're looking at volume here. So this captures metabolic stress. It's not so much a load, because you don't need to go super heavy on this stuff, but it's all about the total work done and the quality of the work that's done. So you don't get mechanical tension to that same degree. You do get a small amount of it, and it depends where you play around within that range of volume work. But we'll talk more about the percentages later on with the load discussion. But if you work in these submaximal capacities, you actually get, for a long enough period of time, like most of the sessions are built out and designed to do, you get, and I'm talking about total time done during the exercise, done performing the actual work, which is not a massive amount of time. If you're at the gym for an hour, you're likely only moving that weight for 20 minutes to 30 minutes if you're really good. Sometimes it's 15 minutes to 12 minutes for people as well. So the time that you're exposing it, the longer that can be, is actually the most beneficial portion of training volume, because it forces things like glycogen storage to be increased, or it forces things like increasing creatine phosphate storage, increased capillarization within the muscle. So your ability to recover or recycle oxygen is much more efficient. But There's other considerations too. Some things that you should be really considering is things like they mentioned in that study drop sets as a great example. And this is something that I talk with people all the time, continually about, because they can be a blessing and a curse. Most people don't equate their training in any way, shape, or form, so they have no way of measuring a rough amount of work being done. And especially if you haven't been able to capture what you have done previously, and when you introduce something new, say like a drop set, and you can't compare the amount of work actually being done. So because you're not comparing across different muscle joints, you can actually use sets times reps times load and have that equate quite well. So a great example here is if someone does 10 reps with 3 sets for a 100 kilo bench press, right? That's 3,000 kilos worth of volume load done to the body. But if they do a drop set, right? So for those that aren't aware, a drop set is where you decrease the amount of weight being used and maintain the amount of reps that you're doing. You would go from 100 kilos to 90 kilos to 80 kilos. Well, there's actually 300 kilos worth of work that you're doing less than if you just kept it nice and linear across there. So people think, and the thing with drop sets is it feels still hard because the rest times and stuff become a little bit shorter. So it feels really hard, but you're actually not equating the same amount of work being done. So then on the flip side of that, instead of getting not enough work done, some people go too much work being done and they actually blow past their recoverable volume. So they can continue to take these short rest periods, pump out work, and not pay attention to them going above and beyond the point at which their body would be able to recover from, especially in small muscle exercises, single joint exercises.
Yeah, I think we should also preface this by saying that these recommendations are kind of general recommendations. And when it comes to any kind of programming, obviously you need to take either yourself or the individual into account because everyone responds differently.
And that's it. If you want to see the full discussion, then check out the link below where we've linked the Flex Success Research Review. You'll find that full video along with a whole host of other topics that we've addressed. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did like the video, and as I say, check out the box below for all the other cool things that we've got going on. Cool, see you in the next one.